Emma had always been the kind of person who took care of everything and everyone around her. At 32, she was juggling a demanding job as a project manager, supporting her aging parents, and managing the day-to-day responsibilities of her marriage to Mark. For the past several months, life had been nothing short of chaotic. Work deadlines had kept her awake at night, her mother's recent surgery required constant check-ins, and he claimed it was work stress. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. She brushed it off, chalking it up to her own paranoia. Her best friend Sarah had been the one to finally push her to take a break. "Emma, you're going to burn out," Sarah said one evening over coffee. "Mark can survive a few days on his own. You need to do this for yourself." Emma was hesitant. She couldn't remember the last time she'd taken a trip by herself. The idea felt indulgent, even selfish. But Sarah persisted, and after weeks of gentle prodding, Emma booked a 3-day stay at a cozy seaside inn just a few hours from home. When she'd brought it up over dinner one evening, she expected some resistance. Mark was always quick to point out how much they depended on each other to keep the household running, but to her surprise, he didn't seem fazed at all. In fact, he encouraged her. "That's a great idea," he said, his fork pausing mid-air. "You've been working so hard lately. You deserve a break." His response was almost too enthusiastic, but Emma decided not to overanalyze it. Maybe this was exactly what their marriage needed, a little time apart to recharge and reset. She imagined how happy Mark would be to see her refreshed and relaxed when she returned. The day of the trip arrived, and Emma felt a mix of excitement and guilt as she packed her suitcase. Mark helped her load it into the car, even giving her a playful kiss on the forehead before she left. "Don't worry about a thing," he said, smiling. "I'll handle everything here. Just focus on enjoying yourself." The drive to the inn was peaceful, and by the time she arrived, Emma felt lighter than she had in months. The inn was charming, with whitewashed walls and large bay windows overlooking the ocean. Her room smelled faintly of lavender, and the sound of waves crashing outside lulled her into a sense of calm. The first day was blissful. Emma spent hours walking along the beach, letting the cold sea air fill her lungs. She treated herself to a leisurely dinner at a nearby seafood restaurant and even ordered dessert, something she rarely did. That night she fell asleep to the sound of the ocean, feeling more relaxed than she had in ages. The second day started much the same. Emma woke up early, took her coffee out onto the small balcony attached to her room and watched the sunrise. She felt a pang of guilt for leaving Mark behind, but she reassured herself that this was for the best. She deserved this time. It wasn't until the afternoon that her peaceful bubble began to crack. She was sitting on the sand reading a novel when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Hey, just checking in. How's the trip?" Emma smiled and quickly replied, "It's perfect. Exactly what I needed. Thanks for pushing me to do this." Sarah's response came almost immediately. "Glad to hear it. I saw Mark at the coffee shop earlier. He seemed happy. Almost too happy." Emma frowned, her fingers hovering over the screen. What did that mean? "Too happy? What does that even mean?" she typed back. This time, Sarah took longer to respond. When the message finally came through, it made Emma's stomach drop. "I don't want to alarm you, but he was with someone. A woman. They looked pretty cozy." Emma stared at the screen, her mind racing. Cozy? What did Sarah mean by that? Mark had plenty of female friends, colleagues, even clients. There could be a perfectly innocent explanation for this. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, but a seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. "Are you sure it was him?" she finally replied. "Positive. He didn't see me, but I saw them. Sorry, I just thought you should know." Emma's hands felt clammy as she set the phone down. She wanted to believe there was nothing to worry about, but something about the text gnawed at her. Mark had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her trip, more distracted, less affectionate. She had chalked it up to stress, but now she wasn't so sure. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Emma couldn't focus on her book or enjoy the sound of the waves. She kept replaying Sarah's message in her mind, trying to make sense of it. By evening, she had convinced herself that there was only one way to put her mind at ease. She needed to go home. Emma packed her bags quickly, her heart pounding as she loaded them into the car. She didn't bother calling Mark to tell him she was coming back early. She wanted to surprise him, to see for herself if anything was out of the ordinary. The drive home felt endless. As she got closer to the house, a mix of dread and determination settled over her. She told herself that she was probably overreacting, that Sarah had misunderstood what she saw. But deep down, she knew she wouldn't be able to relax until she knew the truth. When Emma pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. At first, she thought Mark might have gone to bed early, but then she noticed something unusual. His car was in the driveway, but the curtains in the living room were drawn, a habit he rarely bothered with when he was home alone. Emma unlocked the door and stepped inside, her pulse quickening. The air smelled faintly of wine, and as she turned on the light, her eyes landed on two half-enough glasses sitting on the coffee table. Next to them was a scarf she didn't recognize. Her heart began to race. She set her bag down quietly and moved through the house, her senses on high alert. The faint sound of laughter drifted down from upstairs, followed by muffled voices. Emma froze. She wanted to scream, to storm up the stairs and demand an explanation, but her body wouldn't move. She felt like a spectator in her own life, watching as everything she thought she knew crumbled around her. Finally, she forced herself to climb the stairs, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the bedroom door, she hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe what she was seeing. The dim glow of the bedside lamp illuminated the room, and there, tangled in her bed, were Mark and a woman she had never seen before. They both turned toward her, their expressions a mixture of shock and panic. The air felt heavy, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Emma's chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. "What?" Mark was the first to speak, his voice shaky and defensive. "Emma, this isn't what it looks like." The words felt like a cruel joke. Emma let out a bitter laugh, though it came out more as a gasp. "Not what it looks like? Are you serious, Mark?" She gestured toward the bed, her voice rising. "Then what is it?" And the woman, scrambling to gather her clothes, muttered an apology under her breath. "I didn't know. He didn't tell me he was married. His marriage was mean." Emma turned her glare to the stranger, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Save it," she snapped. "This isn't about you. Just get out." The woman hesitated, looking to Mark as if waiting for him to intervene, but he said nothing. His silence was answer enough. Without another word, the woman slipped past Emma and disappeared down the stairs. The sound of the front door closing behind her echoed through the house, leaving Emma and Mark alone in the suffocating stillness of their bedroom. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma stared at Mark, her mind racing with questions, accusations, and a deep, gnawing hurt that threatened to consume her. Finally, she broke the silence. "How long?" Her voice was cold, steady. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze. "Emma, please, let's just sit down and talk about this." "How long?" He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "A few months." The admission hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, gripping the doorframe for support. "Months? You've been doing this for months?" Her voice cracked, and she hated the vulnerability that crept into it. Mark took a step toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't you dare come near me." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for this to happen." Emma let out a hollow laugh, her anger flaring. "You didn't mean for this to happen? What does that even mean, Mark? Did you just trip and fall into an affair?" He flinched at her words, but she didn't care. She was done holding back. All the hurt and frustration she'd been bottling up over the past few months came pouring out in a "Do you have any idea what I've been going through? I've been bending over backward to make this marriage work, to keep everything together while you're off." "Doing this?" She gestured wildly toward the bed, her voice shaking with emotion. "I trusted you, Mark. I believed in us, and this is how you repay me?" Mark sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you, Emma. I swear I do." "Love?" She spat the word like it was poison. "You don't do this to someone you love. You don't lie to them, betray them, humiliate them like this." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief. She had never felt so betrayed, so utterly alone. "I need to get out of here," she said finally, her voice trembling. She turned on her heel and headed for the door, but Mark jumped up to block her path. "Emma, please, don't go. Let's talk about this. We can fix this. I can fix this." She stared at him, her expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You don't get to decide that, Mark. You don't get to act like everything's fine now that you've been caught." Pushing past him, she stormed down the stairs and grabbed her suitcase, still sitting by the front door. She could hear Mark calling after her, but she didn't stop. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the lock, and when she finally stepped outside, the cold night air hit her like a slap in the face. She threw her suitcase into the trunk of her car and climbed into the driver's seat, her heart pounding. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't stay here. Not with him. Not tonight. As she pulled out of the driveway, tears blurred her vision. She wiped them away angrily, refusing to let herself break down completely. Not yet. She needed to get somewhere safe first. Somewhere she... Her first instinct was to call Sarah, but she hesitated. As much as she loved her best friend, Emma wasn't ready to face the inevitable questions and sympathy just yet. Instead, she drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, her mind racing. Every memory of her and Mark together played in her head like a cruel montage. Their wedding day, their first apartment, the lazy Sunday morning spent curled up on the couch. She had thought they were happy. Sure, things had been tough lately, but she never imagined he would betray her like this. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of a small, all-night diner, Emma felt completely drained. She parked the car and sat there for a long moment, staring at the neon sign flickering above the door. The weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on her, and for the first time that night, it wasn't the quiet, dignified kind of crying she was used to. It was raw and messy, the kind of crying that left her gasping for breath. All the pain, anger, and humiliation came pouring out in waves, and she couldn't stop it. When the tears finally subsided, Emma wiped her face with the sleeve of her jacket and took a deep, shuddering breath. She still didn't know what she was going to do, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. She reached for her phone and stared at the screen, her finger hovering over Sarah's name in her contacts. She needed someone to talk to, someone to help her make sense of this mess. But before she could press call, another thought crossed her mind. What if this wasn't just about Mark's betrayal? What if there were more secrets waiting to be uncovered? Emma's hand tightened around the phone. She wasn't ready to face Mark again, not yet, but she was ready for answers. The night after Emma discovered Mark's betrayal felt like the longest of her life. She had barely slept, her mind consumed by questions and replaying the scene in their bedroom over and over again. Even now, sitting on Sarah's couch in the early morning light, Emma felt like she was floating outside her own body. She could see herself, a woman broken by betrayal, her world turned upside down, but it still didn't feel real. Sarah placed a steaming mug of tea in Emma's hands and sat down beside her. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," Sarah said gently, her voice laced with concern. Emma stared down at the tea, watching the faint tendrils of steam rise into the air. She hadn't cried since leaving the diner the night before, and the numbness she felt now was almost worse than the initial wave of pain. "I don't even know where to start," she murmured. Sarah reached out and squeezed Emma's hand. "Start wherever you need to. I'm here." Emma took a deep breath and began to recount everything. Mark's encouragement for her to take the trip, the text from Sarah, the glasses of wine, and finally what she had walked in on. Her voice trembled at times, but she pushed through, needing to let it out. When she was done, she felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, as though unburdening herself had only made the weight of the truth more real. "I just don't understand," Emma said, her voice breaking. "How could he do this to me? How could he lie to me for months and act like everything was fine?" Sarah shook her head, her expression a mixture of anger and sympathy. "There's no excuse for what he did, Emma. None. But you don't have to figure it all out right now. Take it one step at a time." Emma nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Mark had always been good at hiding his emotions, but looking back, she realized there had been signs. Small moments she had brushed off or explained away. She thought about the late nights he claimed to be working, the sudden distance between them, the way he had seemed so eager for her to go on this trip. Had he been planning this all along? The thought made her stomach turn. Sarah's phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping Emma out of her thoughts. Sarah glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's Mark," she said, holding the phone up to show Emma. Emma's chest tightened. "What does he want?" "He says he's been trying to call you, but you're not answering. He's asking if you're with me." Emma's phone had been silent in her bag since last night. She hadn't wanted to hear from Mark or anyone else. "Don't answer her," she said quickly. "I'm not ready to talk to him." Sarah nodded and put her phone back down. "Take your time. He doesn't get to dictate when you're ready to have this conversation." Emma felt a surge of gratitude for her friend. Sarah had always been her rock, but now more than ever, Emma was grateful to have someone who truly understood her. For the next few hours, Emma and Sarah talked about what Emma wanted to do next. Should she confront Mark and demand more answers? Should she stay away from him entirely? Was their marriage even salvageable? The questions felt overwhelming, but Sarah helped her break things down into manageable steps. "You don't have to decide everything today," Sarah said firmly, "but you should at least figure out what you want in the short term. Do you want to stay here for a few days? Do you need to see a lawyer? We can take it, one step at a time." Emma nodded, appreciating Sarah's practical approach. "I think I need to talk to him," she admitted reluctantly. "Not to forgive him, just to understand. I need to know the full truth, no matter how much it hurts." Sarah hesitated, but ultimately nodded. "If that's what you need, then do it. But promise me you won't let him manipulate you or make you feel like this is your fault. None of this is on you, Emma." "I promise," Emma said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. Later that afternoon, Emma finally turned her phone back on. Dozens of missed calls and messages from Mark flooded her screen, each one more desperate than the last. "Emma, please, call me. I know I messed up, but I need to talk to you. Where are you? I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to fix this." The messages made her stomach churn, but she forced herself to respond. "I'll come by the house tonight. We need to talk." Mark replied almost immediately, "I'll be here. Please, Emma, let me explain." Emma's hands shook as she put the phone down. She didn't know if she was ready to face him, but she knew she had to. That evening she drove back to the house, her emotions swinging wildly between anger, sadness, and a strange sense of detachment. It was still her home, but it no longer felt like a place of safety. When she pulled into the driveway, Mark was already waiting on the porch. He looked disheveled, his hair messy and dark circles under his eyes. He stood as she got out of the car, but she held up a hand to stop him from coming any closer. "Let's do this inside," she said, her voice flat. Mark nodded silently and stepped aside to let her in. The living room looked exactly as it had the night before, except now the glasses of wine were gone and the scarf was nowhere to be seen. Emma wondered if Mark had spent the entire day cleaning up, trying to erase the evidence of his betrayal. They sat down across from each other, the silence between them heavy and uncomfortable. Emma was the first to speak. "I want the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "No lies, no excuses. I need to know everything." Mark nodded, his expression grim. "Okay," he said quietly. "You deserve that." He began to talk, and the story he told was both familiar and devastating. He admitted that the affair had started a few months ago, shortly after one of their bigger arguments. He claimed he hadn't been looking for anything, that it had just happened, but Emma found that hard to believe. He described the woman as someone he had met through work, someone who made... Emma's anger flared. "Unimportant? Do you have any idea how hard I've been working to keep everything together? To support you, to support us? And this is how you repay me?" Mark looked down at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "I know," he said quietly. "I know I messed up, but it wasn't about you, Emma. It was about me. I was selfish and stupid, and I wasn't thinking about how it would hurt you." Emma shook her head, her heart aching. "You don't get to use that as an excuse. You don't get to brush this off as some mistake. You made a choice, Mark. A choice that destroyed everything we had." Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent too long crying over him already. Mark tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't," she said firmly. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." For a long time they sat in silence, the weight of everything left unsaid, hanging between them. Emma knew she had a long road ahead of her, one filled with hard decisions and painful emotions, but for the first time since discovering the truth, she felt a small spark of clarity. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain: she deserved better than this. Emma sat alone in her car outside the house she once called home, the cold January air fogging the windshield as she stared blankly ahead. The confrontation with Mark earlier that evening had left her drained, her emotions torn between anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Yet, amid the chaos, a quiet but persistent thought had taken root. She couldn't stay here, not with him. For years, Emma had defined herself by her marriage, building her world around Mark and the life they had created together. Now, that foundation had crumbled, revealing cracks that had likely been there all along. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her breath coming in shaky bursts. It was time to decide what came next. Taking a deep breath, she started the engine and drove to Sarah's apartment. Sarah had told her she was welcome to stay as long as she needed, and right now, Emma needed that safe harbor. When Emma arrived, Sarah was waiting with a warm hug and a glass of wine. They sat together in the dimly lit living room, the silence between them comforting rather than oppressive. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. "How did it go?" she asked gently, though the concern in her voice was evident. Emma stared at the glass in her hands, swirling the wine absently. "He admitted everything," she said, her voice hollow. "He said it wasn't about me, that he felt unimportant or unappreciated or whatever excuse he thought would make it better. But it doesn't make it better, Sarah. It doesn't change what he did." Sarah nodded, letting Emma vent without interruption. "He kept saying he wanted to fix things, that he loved me and didn't want to lose me. But how do you fix something like this? How do you come back from it?" Emma shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't think I can." Sarah placed a reassuring hand on Emma's arm. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. It's okay to take your time, to figure out what you really want and need." Emma nodded, though deep down she already knew what she needed. She needed space to think, to heal, and to rediscover who she was outside of her marriage. The next morning, Emma woke up feeling more resolute. The decision to leave wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. Over coffee, she discussed her plan with Sarah, who offered her unwavering support. "I think I'm going to stay here for a while," Emma said, "but I also want to meet with a lawyer, figure out what my options are. I need to protect myself." Sarah smiled warmly. "I think that's a smart move, and you know I'll help you every step of the way." Emma spent the next few days focusing on practical matters. She contacted a divorce attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, who immediately put her at ease. During their first meeting, Emma laid out the details of her situation, and Carla assured her that she had every right to pursue a divorce on her terms. "It's going to be a process," Carla said, "but the important thing is that you're taking control of your life. You're stronger than you think, Emma." The words struck a chord with Emma. For so long she had felt powerless, trapped in a cycle of doubt and fear. But now, she was beginning to reclaim her sense of agency, one step at a time. Mark, meanwhile, continued to reach out, alternating between apologies and pleas for another chance. His texts and voicemails became increasingly desperate, but Emma stayed firm in her resolve. She knew she couldn't let him manipulate her into staying in a marriage that had been irreparably damaged. One afternoon, as Emma was packing up some of her belongings at the house, Mark arrived unexpectedly. He stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of regret and hope. "Emma," he said softly, "can we talk?" Emma straightened, setting down the box she had been holding. "I don't think there's much left to say, Mark." "Please," he insisted, stepping closer. "I know I messed up, more than I can ever make up for. But I love you, and I don't want to lose you. We can go to therapy, work through this together. I'll do whatever it takes." Emma studied him for a long moment, her emotions warring within her. A part of her still cared for him. How could she not, after everything they had shared? But love alone wasn't enough. Trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. "I loved you, Mark," she said quietly. "I gave you everything I had, and you betrayed me. I don't think I can ever forgive that." Mark's face fell, and for a moment he looked utterly defeated. "So, that's it? You're really leaving?" Emma nodded, her voice steady. "I have to. For me." He didn't argue or try to stop her this time. Instead, he simply nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "So am I," Emma said, her own voice tinged with sadness. As she walked out the door for the last time, Emma felt a strange mix of emotions, grief for the life she was leaving behind, but also a sense of liberation. For the first time in years, she felt like she was choosing her own path. Over the weeks and months that followed, Emma focused on rebuilding her life. She moved into a cozy apartment of her own, started attending therapy, and reconnected with friends she had drifted away from during her marriage. One evening, while sitting on her balcony and watching the sunset, Emma reflected on how far she had come. The pain of Mark's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She had discovered a strength within herself that she hadn't known existed, and she was determined to keep moving forward. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was Sarah, sending a picture of a new cafe she wanted to try. Emma smiled and typed out a quick reply, feeling grateful for the people who had supported her through her darkest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, she was excited about what lay ahead. She was free, and she was finally ready to embrace the life she deserved.